Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? She sat at the far end, hands folded, a notepad in front of her, though she hadn't written a single word. The low hum of the projector, the shuffle of boots, the clipped voices of officers, all of it seemed to pass her by like she wasn't even there. Her name was called once, only once, and too casually. A surname spoken without weight, like someone reading from a forgotten file. No eye contact, no pause. She almost smiled at that. Almost. Because this wasn't new. She had learned years ago that being invisible in a room of uniforms could be a weapon in itself. Men dismissed her. Commanders overlooked her. Teammates assumed she would do the small, simple tasks. They never asked what it had cost her to get here. They never wondered why she never complained. And she preferred it that way. The briefing went on, a suspected weapons transfer through a ruined valley, a small convoy, a cluster of armed watchtowers carved into the ridges. On the surface, it was a routine operation. Intercept, recover, exfil. But the murmurs, the subtle shifts in tone, told a different story. Something about this mission didn't add up. She knew it, she felt it. When the lights came back on, chatter filled the room, chairs scraped, radios hissed, orders scattered like birds. Nobody asked her what she thought. Nobody turned her way. That was fine. She stood quietly and slipped her notebook into her pocket. Blank pages, blank like the silence she carried. But there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. Later, in the dim light of the equipment room, she laced her boots in silence. Her rifle lay across the table. She ran a cloth along its body, careful, methodical, like touching something sacred. Her reflection caught faintly in the metal, sharp cheekbones, tired eyes, a strand of hair loose across her brow. She thought of her father. Not the man in his last years, weakened and pale, but the man in uniform she remembered from her childhood. The one who stood straight even when storms ripped roofs apart. He had taught her discipline without words, patience without lectures. He had never said, "Follow me into the fight," but he had lived in a way that made her believe she had no choice but to continue where he left off. His medals sat in a box she rarely opened, not because she didn't care, but because when she touched them, her chest ached with a grief that had no language. She secured the last strap on her vest. The fabric pressed against her ribs, heavy, constricting, but familiar. From the doorway, a voice broke the silence. "You ready?" It was Sergeant Cole. Rough voice, lines around his eyes, the kind of man who carried regrets he never spoke aloud. He didn't say much to her. Most days, only what was necessary. But when he did, it was never empty. She nodded, always. He studied her for a moment, then moved on. That was enough. The helicopter blades carved the sky into a roar. Dust whipped across the landing zone, stinging her face. She pulled her cap low, checked her gear again, then climbed aboard. Inside, the team strapped in. 9 men, 1 woman, eyes forward. Silence between them except for the occasional cough, the clink of metal, the static of comms. She sat across from Corporal Harris, the youngest. His hands trembled slightly as he checked his rifle. He looked up once, caught her watching, and quickly looked away. Fear, she recognized it immediately. Not weakness, just the honest pulse of someone about to face something they weren't ready for. She remembered that feeling. The first mission. The first time you wonder if your training will actually save you, or if you'll freeze the moment you need to move. She leaned forward just slightly, voice low enough only he could hear. "You'll be fine, just breathe." His eyes flicked back to hers, surprised. He nodded once, almost grateful, then gripped his rifle tighter. The helicopter lifted, tilting them toward the mountains. Through the small window, she watched the horizon bleed orange with the last traces of daylight. Shadows stretched across the valleys, long and merciless. Somewhere out there, men waited to kill them. Somewhere out there, something wasn't being told in the clean lines of the briefing. And she couldn't shake the thought, why me, why now, why this mission? The first hour was silence. Just the thrum of rotors, the hum of headsets, the occasional glance between teammates. She closed her eyes, letting the vibration run through her bones. And memories slipped in. A hospital corridor, the smell of antiseptic, sharp and sterile. A bed where her younger brother had lain, tubes in his arms, machines beeping their cold rhythm. She had sat beside him, uniform still dusty, pretending to be strong while he tried to smile through the pain. He had asked her once, "Why do you do it? Why go back out there?" She hadn't answered, because how could she tell him that she didn't know who she was without the uniform? That silence in civilian life felt heavier than gunfire. That every wound she carried wasn't just hers, it was hers to guard, hers to hold so he wouldn't have to. She opened her eyes before the memory could swallow her. The helicopter tilted sharply, voices crackled. "We're 2 minutes out," the pilot said. 2 minutes until the valley, 2 minutes until silence broke. The landing was rough gravel, wind, the smell of oil and dust. Boots hit the ground, rifles raised, eyes scanning. She moved with them, precise, focused, like muscle memory had taken over. Night was swallowing the sky now. Only the faintest sliver of moon offered light, casting long shadows across the rocks. The convoy they were meant to intercept hadn't yet arrived. The plan was to set up overwatch, wait, strike fast. She climbed with Cole and 2 others up a ridge, every step heavy but controlled. The air thinned as they rose. Her breath misted in the cold. At the top she lay prone, rifle cradled against her shoulder, scope scanning the valley. Quiet, still. But not empty. In the distance faint lights flickered. Too many for a small convoy, too steady to be careless. Her stomach tightened. This wasn't what they were told to expect. She clicked her comm softly. "Cole, do you see that?" A pause, then his voice low. "Yeah, I see it." Down below the others shifted uneasily. Harris's voice cracked through. That's a lot of vehicles." She kept her eyes through the scope, tracking. Trucks, armored, headlights cutting through the dark. At least double the number briefed, maybe more. Her pulse quickened, her fingers tightened. Something wasn't right. Something was very, very wrong. And in that moment, as the convoy rolled into position, a thought cut through her mind, sharp, cold, undeniable. They didn't send us here for what they said. Why hadn't command told them the truth? That question burned in her mind as the convoy below expanded into something far larger than what the briefing had promised. Headlights stretched in a crooked line, their beams crossing like swords in the darkness. Too many trucks, too many men. Her finger hovered near the trigger, but she didn't squeeze. Not yet. The valley was a stage, and they were the ones standing under the harsh spotlight. She steadied her breathing, keeping the rifle firm, eyes locked through the scope. "Cole," she whispered into comms, "this isn't recon size. This is an operation." Static hummed before his reply came, quiet, almost reluctant. "Yeah, feels wrong." Down the ridge, Harris was breathing too loudly. Fear had a sound, shaky, uneven, like a heart pounding in your ear. He whispered, "We're outnumbered." She didn't respond. Neither did Cole. No one wanted to confirm what was already obvious. Her crosshairs swept over faces. Men with rifles, men scanning the dark. One leaned against a truck, lighting a cigarette, the glow flickering against his scarred cheek. She watched the smoke curl upward, dissolving into the black sky, and wondered, did he know they were here? Did he smell the trap just like she did? Time slowed. Minutes dragged, thick with tension. The wind whistled across the rocks, carrying sand into her face, grit between her teeth. She blinked it away, forcing her eyes steady. Then a sudden crack, a sound that didn't belong. Not from them. From behind. Her heart jolted. She rolled slightly, lifting her cheek from the scope. The sound echoed again, metal against stone, faint but deliberate. She glanced at Cole. He had heard it too. His jaw tightened, eyes darting over the ridge. The hairs on her neck rose. The convoy below hadn't flinched. which meant only one thing the enemy already knew. They weren't the ones hunting. They were the ones being watched. A whisper of realization brushed against her thoughts. We've been set up. The ambush struck like a match against dry tinder. Gunfire tore through the night, sudden, explosive. Tracers cut across the ridge, searing lines of fire through the darkness. Shouts erupted below. The trucks roared, engines revving, headlights sweeping as men spilled from doors, rifles raised. She dropped flat, cheek pressed into dirt, as bullets clanged against the rocks inches from her. Dust exploded upward, choking, blinding. Her scope blurred with grit. Cole's voice snapped in her ear. Contact multiple. Her body moved before her mind caught up. Rifle steady, breath in, breath out, one shot. A man's silhouette collapsed near a truck, his rifle clattering against steel. Another breath, another squeeze. A second figure fell. But there were too many, too fast. Harris shouted, panic cracking his words. They're everywhere. Her jaw clenched. Panic spreads like fire if unchecked. She pulled the comm close, her voice low, steady, deliberate. Harris, focus. One target at a time, breathe. She didn't know if he listened, but she hoped the sound of her calm would anchor him to the ground he was about to lose. Minutes became chaos. Bullets screamed, ricochets sparked. The ridge was no longer cover, it was a cage. She shifted position, sliding along the rock, heart hammering. Every movement calculated, every second stretched thin. Her rifle cracked again and again, but each shot was swallowed by the storm. A sudden cry ripped through comms. Martinez down below, his voice strangled with pain. I'm hit. Then static. Her chest constricted. She wanted to move, to crawl down, to drag him out, but orders chained her. Position, cover, don't break, don't expose. And yet, every fiber of her body screamed. Cole's voice cut in sharp. Stay put, we hold this line or we're all done. She bit down hard on her tongue, tasting iron. Restraint was its own kind of wound. Through the scope, she caught sight of something that froze her blood. Not just soldiers, not just a convoy. A flag, faded, tattered but unmistakable. It wasn't supposed to be here. This faction wasn't supposed to operate in this valley. This was bigger than supply runs, bigger than black market trades. Her pulse spiked, her thoughts tangled. What were they really sent here to do? What had command hidden? And why did her gut twist like she had seen this flag before? Not in intelligence briefings, but in memory. Cole, she murmured, barely a breath, we're not here for what they told us. This is something else. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was flat, heavy. Doesn't matter now, we survive first, questions later. But she knew he was lying to himself. He had seen it too. He just didn't want to face what it meant. The firefight stretched into a brutal stalemate. Hours blurred into the rhythm of gunfire, reload, gunfire. Bodies slumped across the dirt below. The ridge was scarred with impact marks, fragments of stone torn loose. At some point the shouting dulled. The enemy pulled back, regrouping. The trucks dimmed their lights, engines idling low. Silence hung heavy, broken only by the moan of wind. Her muscles ached from tension. Her fingers trembled when she finally lowered the rifle. Her face was streaked with dust and sweat, her lips dry and cracked. Harris's voice came through, small, almost childlike. Are they gone? No one answered him. Because they were, not really. In the pause, in that strange quiet, she felt her chest tighten again. Not from fear, but from memory. Her brother's voice, weak but steady, why do you go back? She had never answered him, and now, in the silence of the ridge, she wondered if she even knew the truth herself. Was it duty, legacy, or something darker, the need to punish herself for surviving things others did? Her hand drifted unconsciously to her ribs, where an old scar lay hidden under her vest. A wound from years ago, a wound she should have died from, but didn't. Her wounds weren't scars, not to her. They were verses, etched lines of a story that kept being written whether she wanted it or not. And here in this valley, the poem had started again. Cole crouched beside her, voice low. They'll come again, stronger, this isn't over. She nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere, on the flag, on the truth being hidden, on the gnawing certainty that someone somewhere wanted them buried out here without answers. She looked down at Harris, his eyes wide, his hands shaking as he tried to clean his rifle. She thought of Martinez, whose silence still hung heavy in the comms. She thought of her father, her brother, her own silence in the briefing room. Something about all of it tied together, threads she couldn't yet untangle. But one thing she knew with absolute certainty. The real mission hadn't even begun yet. How many were left alive? That was the first question that carved into her mind when the gunfire finally faded into silence. The second was heavier. How many more would they lose before dawn? The ridge was quiet now, but not with peace. It was the quiet of exhaustion, of grief pressed down beneath duty. The convoy's engines still rumbled faintly in the valley below, a warning that the enemy wasn't finished. Just waiting, just circling. She pulled her cheek from the dirt and rose to her elbows. Her body felt made of stone, stiff from hours pressed against rock. Every breath carried the taste of grit. Her lips were cracked, her throat raw. She swallowed hard and it hurt. Harris sat a few feet away, hunched, fumbling clumsily at his rifle. His fingers slipped over the magazine, trembling. His helmet tilted too far back, exposing pale skin slick with sweat. She watched him for a moment, saw the panic building behind his eyes. And then she remembered herself at his age, the first time bullets tore past her ear. The first time she wondered if she would see another sunrise. She crawled closer, her voice calm, firm but gentle. Harris, stop. His eyes flicked to her, wide, frantic. I can't, the mag, it won't. She placed her hand on his, steadying it. The rifle stilled. His breathing hitched, then slowed just slightly, matching hers. Look at me, she whispered. You're alive, that means you're doing fine, one thing at a time. For a moment something softened in his face. Relief, a thread of trust. He nodded, swallowing hard, and pulled his helmet back into place. Small victories, sometimes that's all there was. Cole's silhouette moved along the ridge, checking each position, his shoulders heavy in the dim light. When he reached her, he crouched low. His voice carried the weight of something he didn't want to say. Martinez is gone. She felt the words more than heard them. A punch straight into her chest, leaving no sound behind. She closed her eyes briefly. Martinez, the steady one, the man who always had a joke tucked away, who swore he'd open a barbecue joint when he got out. She could still hear his laugh, echoing off steel walls of the barracks. Where? She asked softly. Below tried to move, didn't make it 2 steps. Cole's jaw clenched. We can't get him out. She bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted copper. Leaving a body behind was its own kind of wound, one you didn't patch, one you carried. She didn't argue, there was nothing to say. The hours crawled forward, slow and merciless. The night pressed down like a weight, the cold seeping into her gloves, her vest, her bones. They took turns watching the valley, eyes straining against shadows. The enemy's convoy stayed put, lights dimmed, figures shifting in the dark like restless phantoms. Every so often a shot cracked, testing ranges, probing nerves. Each time they flinched, returned fire, then silence again, a cruel rhythm. In the lull people spoke, not loud, not casual, just fragments, because silence too could suffocate. Corporal Jensen muttered, voice hoarse, I told my kid I'd be home for her birthday. Pink balloons she wanted, pink, said it twice. He exhaled, sharp, bitter. Guess I lied. No one answered, not because they didn't care, but because they did. She shifted slightly, dirt scratching her skin, her rifle pressed to her chest. She thought of birthdays too, ones she had missed, candles she hadn't lit, wishes she hadn't made. Her brother's face, pale in the hospital light. His last birthday before the machines took him away. The memory caught in her throat like barbed wire. She didn't let it out. The night dragged toward dawn, and with it came the whisper of decision. Cole moved between them, gathering quiet words, plans half-formed. When he crouched beside her again, his expression was carved from stone. "We can't hold the ridge forever," he said. "We'll move at first light, try to cut east, regroup with command." She studied his face. There was something in his tone, not just strategy, something else, something unspoken. "You don't think they'll let us make it out?" It wasn't a question. He didn't answer right away. His eyes flicked toward the valley where the enemy still waited, then back to her. "I think someone wanted us here, and someone doesn't care if we don't come back." Her stomach twisted. The thought she had been pushing away now spoken aloud. Confirmation, heavy and cold. "Why?" she asked, though part of her already feared she knew. Cole shook his head. "Not sure, but I've been doing this long enough to smell a setup." He leaned closer, his voice a whisper. "And you saw it too, didn't you? That flag?" She held his gaze. For a moment silence stretched between them. Then she nodded, slow. "Yes, I saw it." His jaw tightened, and she swallowed hard, words catching in her throat. She could lie. She could deflect. She could keep the secret buried. But the truth pressed against her chest, begging to break free. "I've seen it before," she admitted, her voice barely more than breath. Cole's eyes sharpened. "Where?" Her heart pounded. She thought of the photographs buried deep in her drawer, the reports she wasn't supposed to read, the hospital nights when she had traced that flag in her mind, knowing what it meant, knowing why her brother had been caught in the crossfire that ended his life. But the words refused to come. "Not yet." "Not here," she whispered. "Not now." Cole studied her but didn't push. Maybe he knew the weight behind her silence. Maybe he carried silences of his own. He just nodded once, then moved on. Dawn crept over the valley like a blade, cutting away shadows, exposing scars. The convoy below stirred awake, engines revving low, figures moving with fresh purpose. Her scope caught faces clearly now. Hard eyes, scarred skin, the flag more visible in the pale light. Her stomach clenched again, memories pressing hard. She breathed in slowly, pressing the rifle tight. Her mind replayed her brother's last words, soft, tired, spoken through tubes. "Don't carry me into the fight with you." And here she was, carrying him anyway. Cole's voice snapped her back. "We move in 2 minutes. 2 minutes until they broke cover. 2 minutes until the valley erupted again." Her hands flexed against the rifle. Her heart pounded against her vest. And in those 2 minutes, she made a silent promise to herself, to her brother, to the ghosts already carved into the battlefield. She wasn't leaving this valley without answers. No matter what it cost. The night was suffocatingly still, as if the air itself feared to move. The stars above flickered faintly, uncaring witnesses to the turmoil unraveling below. The platoon had dug into the rocky ridge overlooking the valley, their makeshift camp a haphazard line of foxholes, sandbags, and weary bodies running on fumes. No one spoke unless necessary. The silence wasn't discipline, it was exhaustion mixed with dread. Aisha sat apart from the rest, back against a cracked boulder, her rifle across her lap. The sleeves of her olive-green army shirt were rolled halfway, exposing bruised arms, veins standing out from fatigue. She had cleaned the dirt from her face earlier, but the shadows under her eyes told the truth her body tried to hide. She hadn't truly slept in days. Her mind replayed the last 48 hours on loop. The ambush, the betrayal, Khalid's sacrifice, the panicked retreat through the desert until their throats were raw with thirst. And then the orders, hold this ridge at all costs, no reinforcements coming. She wanted to scream at the emptiness. At all costs, we're already spent. What more is there left to give? But discipline held her in check. That and Khalid's final words, which had carved themselves into her chest like shrapnel. "You don't fight for glory. You fight so the ones after us won't have to." Those words haunted her now. Was she strong enough to carry them? The commander's voice cracked the silence. Patrol back in 15. No signs of enemy movement yet. It wasn't reassurance, it was warning. They would come. Everyone knew it. The Empire wasn't the kind to leave a job half done. Aisha adjusted her grip on the rifle, running her thumb along the cool metal of the trigger guard. She remembered her first day at training, how the weapon had felt too heavy, too alien in her hands. Back then, she had been a girl trying to fit into boots too large for her. Now, the rifle felt like an extension of her arm. A burden, yes, but one she had grown into. Her gaze drifted to the others in the platoon. Hamed, hunched over a radio trying to catch static whispers from command. Bilal, his face hollow as he meticulously sharpened a combat knife, though everyone knew he was too drained to fight up close if it came to that. And Rayman, barely 18, cradling his weapon as if it were a lifeline, his lips moving silently in prayer. They looked like ghosts already. And maybe they were. Near midnight, the first sign came. A faint hum, not from the earth but from the sky. Aisha froze, tilting her head upward. At first, it was subtle, like the low buzz of a faraway generator, but soon it thickened, deepened, until the rocks under their boots vibrated. Drones, Bilal muttered, his voice sharp. Dozens of red eyes blinked into existence against the darkness, sweeping the valley like predators searching for prey. The drones moved in swarms, their movements mechanical yet eerily graceful, like a school of metallic fish. The commander barked orders and every soldier ducked low, flattening against the ridge's jagged stones. Fingers tightened on triggers. Breath slowed. The swarm passed once, scanning, twice, circling back closer this time. And then, one red eye locked onto their position. The first explosion tore the night apart. A thunderclap of fire and dust erupted at the ridge's edge, throwing two soldiers back like rag dolls. Screams followed, sharp and raw, before the next barrage rained down. The valley lit up in pulses of red and orange, each blast hammering into the earth, shaking the ridge beneath them. "Aisha, get to cover," Hamed shouted, but she was already moving, dragging the youngest soldier, Rayman, into the shadow of a collapsed sandbag wall just as shrapnel whistled overhead. Her heart slammed against her ribs. The air reeked of gunpowder and ozone, stinging her nose, burning her lungs. She peeked out between bursts of light, catching glimpses of the swarm circling overhead, firing in perfect synchrony. They weren't here to scare them. They were here to finish them. "Return fire," the commander roared. Muzzles flashed along the ridge as the platoon unleashed everything they had. Tracers cut through the darkness, streaks of angry orange meeting the swarm of red eyes. Some drones sparked, spiraled, and fell smoking into the valley below. Others darted and weaved, adapting, retaliating with cold precision. Aisha steadied her rifle on the broken wall, eyes narrowed, breath measured. She squeezed the trigger, each shot deliberate, disciplined. One drone burst into flame. Another shattered into fragments. For a fleeting moment she felt control, like maybe they stood a chance. But then the swarm split. Half stayed above, raining fire. The other half swooped low, skimming the ridge like vultures. One drone barreled straight toward her. She fired once, twice, its armor sparking but not breaking. At the last second she rolled sideways as it crashed into the sandbags where she'd been crouched. The explosion lifted her off the ground, slammed her against the boulder she'd been resting on hours earlier. Pain flared across her ribs, knocking the air out of her. Through the ringing in her ears she heard it, Rahman's scream. She forced herself upright, vision blurred, ribs aching. Rahman was pinned under debris, a shard of metal lodged in his thigh, blood spreading fast. Aisha scrambled to him, adrenaline drowning the pain. She ripped the shard free, ignoring his cries, and pressed her scarf against the wound to slow the bleeding. Her hands shook, but her voice stayed steady. "You're not dying here, you hear me," she said, though part of her wondered if it was a promise she couldn't keep. Another blast hit nearby, showering them in dirt. She looked up, teeth clenched, rage igniting in her chest. "We can't hold like this." The commander must have thought the same. He staggered through the chaos, blood streaking his forehead, voice hoarse but unbroken. "Fall back into the caves." The order rippled through the survivors. The ridge was lost. Aisha heaved Rayman over her shoulder, his weight nearly buckling her knees. Gritting her teeth, she stumbled toward the dark opening carved into the cliffside, gunfire and explosions lighting her path. Others followed, dragging the wounded, covering each other in bursts of fire. The swarm pursued, relentless, but the narrow mouth of the cave gave them cover. The drones couldn't dive in without crashing against stone. As the last soldier dove inside, Bilal lobbed a grenade at the entrance. The blast collapsed part of the opening, sealing them in. Darkness swallowed them. The sounds of war outside muffled into a distant roar. And for the first time in hours, silence returned. The cave smelled of dust and damp stone. Their flashlights flickered weakly, illuminating pale, bloodied faces. Of the 20 who had held the ridge, only 9 remained standing. The commander slumped against the wall, chest heaving. "We hold here. They can't get all of us inside." But Aisha could see the truth in everyone's eyes. This wasn't safety. It was a tomb waiting to be sealed. She eased Rayman onto the ground, checking his wound again. He was pale, trembling, but alive. For now. And then, for the first time since it began, she allowed herself to feel it, fear. It wasn't fear of dying. It was fear of failing. Fear that Khalid's sacrifice, their suffering, their fight, it would all be for nothing. Her throat tightened, but she forced the tears back. She couldn't break, not yet. Because outside that cave the swarm was still circling, waiting. And Aisha knew this was only the beginning of the storm. The cave was alive with the sounds of pain and exhaustion. Every corner echoed with labored breathing, muffled groans, and the sharp hiss of fabric tearing into makeshift bandages. The survivors lay scattered against the damp stone walls, some clutching wounds, others staring blankly into the darkness as if their souls had already fled. The air was thick, not just with dust but with despair. Aisha sat near Rayman, pressing a cloth against his leg wound. The bleeding had slowed, but he was far from stable. His face was pale, eyes glassy, yet when he met her gaze, he still tried to smile. That broke something inside her. "You should rest," she whispered, though her own body screamed for the same. "I'll rest when," his voice faltered, he coughed, grimacing, "when we're out of here." She gave him a small nod, though she knew the odds were stacked against them. The commander, Major Iqbal, leaned heavily on his rifle as if it were the only thing holding him upright. His uniform was scorched, one arm hanging limp from the shoulder, blood soaking through. Still, his eyes held that same steel Aisha had seen on the battlefield, a refusal to bend, even when broken. "We can't stay long," he said, his voice rasping against the stone. "This cave is temporary cover, nothing more. They'll regroup, and when they do, they'll find a way in." Bilal spat onto the floor, his knife still in hand. "Then we fight in the dark, better here than out there." "No," Major Iqbal countered. "We'd be slaughtered. We need to move deeper." A silence followed. The thought of venturing further into the pitch-black maze was no comfort, but it was truth. Aisha looked around the cave. Shadows stretched endlessly beyond the reach of their flickering flashlights, corridors splitting into jagged mouths. The mountain itself seemed alive, ready to swallow them whole. But what choice did they have? The order came. We split into pairs. Injured in the middle, guards front and rear. We push deeper, find an exit. It was a gamble, but survival often was. Aisha helped Rayman to his feet, looping his arm over her shoulder. His weight pressed into her, but she bore it without complaint. The memory of Khalid carrying her during training, refusing to let her collapse on a 20-mile march, flashed through her mind. Now it was her turn. The group began their slow march into the unknown. Their boots scraped against stone, breaths amplified in the tunnel's tight throat. Each step forward felt heavier, not from the weight of gear, but from the weight of what lingered behind them. The ridge they couldn't hold, the comrades they'd lost, the unanswered question of whether this fight had any meaning left. Hours blurred. They walked through winding caverns that twisted back on themselves, through chambers that opened like cathedral vaults, stalactites hanging like jagged teeth. The deeper they went, the colder it grew. Their flashlights revealed strange markings on the walls, scratches, grooves, symbols no one could place. "Natural caves don't form like this," Billow muttered once, running his fingers across the stone. Aisha shivered. The thought that others, human or not, had been here before weighed on her, but she said nothing. Fear was contagious and they already had enough of it. Finally, exhaustion forced them to halt in a chamber wide enough to stretch their lines. They set the injured down, drank sparingly from dwindling canteens, and tried to rest. Aisha sat against the wall, her rifle across her knees. Sleep tugged at her, but she refused. Someone had to stay awake. Someone had to keep watch. She thought of Khalid again, of his smile, of the way he always believed in her when no one else did. She thought of her mother back home, probably still waiting for a letter that would never come. She thought of all the promises she'd made to herself, that she wouldn't let fear define her, that she'd never abandon those who relied on her. Her chest tightened. For the first time she realized the truth. Major Iqbal might not survive his wounds. Bilal was volatile, Hamed was fraying, and the younger ones were already breaking. If the commander fell, who would lead? The thought terrified her more than the enemy, because she knew the answer. The silence shattered suddenly. A sound echoed from deeper within the cave. Not the steady drip of water, not the settling of stone, but a mechanical hum. Low, steady, unnatural. Everyone froze. "What is that?" Reman whispered, fear widening his eyes. The commander gestured for silence, raising his good arm. They extinguished the flashlights, plunging the chamber into suffocating black. The hum grew louder, closer, accompanied now by a faint light, cold, bluish, seeping around the bend of the tunnel. Drones. They had found another way in. Panic rippled through the platoon. Weapons were raised, safeties clicked off. But Aisha's mind raced. If they fought here, trapped in this narrow chamber, they'd be massacred. "Not here," she whispered, loud enough for those near her to hear. "We'll choke in this choke point." Bilal shot her a glare. "Then where? You want to run until we collapse." But Major Iqbal nodded faintly, eyes meeting hers in the dark. "She's right." Aisha swallowed hard. She hadn't meant to speak out. Yet in that moment his agreement felt like a passing of weight, a burden dropping onto her shoulders. Her heart hammered, but she steadied her voice. "We move deeper now." No one argued this time. The march turned into a desperate retreat. The hum grew behind them, echoing off the walls, a predator stalking in the dark. The faint blue light swelled, bending around corners, chasing them. Reman stumbled, nearly dragging Aisha down, but she yanked him upright. Her legs screamed with the effort, but she refused to let him fall. Ahead, the tunnel opened again into a vast chamber. Stalactites hung like spears from the ceiling, while the floor dipped into pools of still, black water. They rushed in, scattering into cover. Seconds later, the swarm entered. A dozen drones, their blue lights cutting through the darkness like blades. The battle erupted instantly. Gunfire cracked, deafening in the cavern. Muzzle flashes stuttered against stone, throwing jagged shadows across the walls. The air filled with the acrid tang of gunpowder and the high-pitched whine of drones diving through the crossfire. One soldier went down, his scream swallowed by the chaos. Another drone exploded into the pool, sending ripples of glowing blue light as its circuits fried. Aisha fired steadily, forcing her breaths into rhythm. Aim, squeeze, shift, each shot precise. Each drone she struck felt like defiance against the universe itself. Beside her, Bilal fought like a madman, charging forward with blade in hand when his rifle clicked empty, slashing at a drone that shrieked sparks as it died. But for every one they destroyed, two more seemed to appear. "Fall back," Major Iqbal shouted, his voice breaking. But this time, he wasn't the one giving orders, because everyone's eyes had already turned to Aisha. Time slowed. She saw it, the fear in their faces, the desperation, the cracks forming in their resolve, and she realized they needed someone to hold them together. Khalid's voice returned to her. "You fight so the ones after us won't have to." Her throat tightened. She couldn't be Khalid, but maybe she could be enough. "Hold the line," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos like steel. "Form a circle, cover the wounded." And to her shock, they listened. The platoon tightened their formation, rifles out, backs to the injured. The next wave of drones hit them, but this time they were ready, firing in all directions. The cavern thundered with defiance, bullets sparking against metal wings, explosions shaking stalactites loose from the ceiling. Aisha stood at the front, rifle blazing, every shot an oath that she would not let them die here, not like this. Blood pounded in her ears. Fear burned away into something sharper. And in that moment, Aisha was no longer just another soldier. She was the center of their will to survive. The fight wasn't over, not yet. But for the first time, they weren't just running. They were resisting. The cavern smelled of ozone and burning metal. Sparks rained from shattered drones, fizzing as they struck the pools of black water. Smoke hung low, clinging to lungs already ragged with exhaustion. The survivors held the line. Their circle formation was battered but unbroken, rifles spitting defiance into the oncoming swarm. Every shot echoed against the stone, louder than their fear. But the drones weren't stopping. For every one that fell with a shriek of circuitry, two more slipped through the haze, their lights glowing like malevolent stars in the darkness. They darted low, searching for gaps, forcing the soldiers to pivot, reload, and fire with trembling hands. It couldn't last. Aisha knew it. She could see it in their eyes, wide, frantic, desperate. She could feel it in her own body, her muscles shaking, her breath ragged, her shoulder aching from recoil. The circle would collapse, unless someone acted. Her eyes scanned the cavern. Through the haze she noticed it, a narrow ledge running along the wall, winding toward a jagged overhang. And above it, nearly hidden in shadow, a cluster of stalactites hung heavy, massive, as if waiting for centuries to fall. A thought struck her, dangerous and raw. She could bring the ceiling down. It would crush drones, maybe block the tunnel they were pouring through. But it would also seal them inside this chamber, with no way back. A gamble between slow death and immediate survival. Her heart pounded. She thought of Khalid, of his voice in her memory. Every choice in war costs something. The question is, what can you live with? She didn't hesitate long. "Bilal," she shouted above the gunfire. He turned, sweat streaming down his dirt-streaked face. "Cover me." He didn't ask why. He just bared his teeth in a wild grin, reloaded, and unleashed a storm of fire toward the swarm. Aisha bolted, dragging Rayman toward the wall. His weight slowed her, but she refused to let him go. She slung his arm tighter around her neck, half carrying him up the narrow ledge. Every step was agony, but the thought of leaving him was worse. Don't do this," Rayman gasped, his voice cracking. "You can't hold all of us on your shoulders." "Watch me," she growled. Bullets whined past as drones swarmed the cavern, their blue lights flashing like lightning. The rest of the platoon held their formation, but their line buckled under the assault. Aisha climbed higher, heart hammering, until she reached the overhang. She lowered Rayman carefully against the stone, then raised her rifle toward the ceiling. Her breath steadied. She squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, striking the base of a stalactite. Cracks spiderwebbed across the stone, dust raining down. She fired again and again. The cavern answered with a groan deep as thunder. Then the ceiling came down. The crash was apocalyptic. A roar filled the cavern as massive stalactites broke loose, plunging into the swarm below. Stone met metal with a sound like the earth itself splitting open. The shockwave rattled teeth, knocked rifles from hands, and hurled dust into choking clouds. Drones were crushed mid-flight, their bodies sparking and screeching as they were obliterated beneath tons of falling rock. The tunnel they had poured from vanished in a cascade of rubble, sealing it completely. Silence followed, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, ringing silence of survival bought at a terrible price. Coughing, the survivors dragged themselves upright. The air was thick with dust, every breath scraping their throats raw. The cavern glowed faintly from the dying sparks of ruined drones, casting eerie shadows across faces pale with shock. Bill staggered forward, wiping blood from a cut on his forehead. He looked up at Aisha on the ledge, rifle still smoking in her hands. "You," his voice was hoarse, almost reverent, "you just saved us." No one spoke for a long moment. They just stared at her, as if trying to reconcile the quiet, steady sniper they once ignored with the woman who had just changed the battle's outcome. Aisha lowered her rifle slowly, the weight of their gazes heavier than any weapon. But she didn't feel like a savior. She felt the crushing truth: she had trapped them. Later, when the dust settled and the wounded were tended, they huddled around a faint glow stick, its green light barely cutting the gloom. Major Iqbal sat propped against the wall, his face pale, his voice weak but steady. "She made the only call she could," he said, glancing toward Aisha. "Don't forget that." But the others shifted uneasily. Hamid muttered, "And now we're sealed in. No way out." Bilal snapped back, "Better sealed in than torn apart by those machines." Their argument echoed through the cavern, sharp and raw. Aisha sat apart, listening in silence. Rahman leaned weakly against her, his hand gripping hers as if to remind her she wasn't alone. But inside, she felt utterly isolated. Because she knew the truth. Every eye now looked to her, not the commander, not anyone else. Her choice had marked her as their leader. And she had no idea how to carry that weight. Hours crawled. The cavern grew colder. Some soldiers dozed fitfully, others sat staring into the darkness as if expecting it to move. Hunger gnawed at stomachs, thirst cracked lips, and the silence pressed down heavier than the stone above. Aisha couldn't sleep. Her mind replayed the sound of the ceiling collapsing, the screams of drones being crushed, the sudden silence afterward. But beneath all that, another sound haunted her. The sound of choice. Of sealing off their only known exit. She rubbed her eyes, exhaustion burning, when she heard footsteps. Bilal sank down beside her, his voice low. "You're not sleeping either, huh?" She shook her head. He smirked faintly. "You know you've got guts. Back at the ridge I thought you were just another sniper. Good shot, quiet, didn't talk much. But tonight you made a call none of us could have made." Aisha said nothing. Bilal's smirk faded. "That's the thing about command. Nobody ever asks for it. It just falls on whoever's strong enough to bear it." She finally met his eyes. "What if I'm not strong enough?" He chuckled, though it sounded more like a sigh. "Too late for that. We're already following you." Then he left her in the silence, his words lingering like a weight she couldn't set down. The next morning, though they had no sense of time, the survivors pushed deeper into the caves, searching for another way out. The tunnels twisted endlessly, some narrowing to crawling spaces, others opening into vast halls of black stone. At times they swore they heard whispers, distant echoes that weren't theirs. But no exit. And food was running out. Aisha carried Rahman as much as she could, though her muscles screamed with every step. She masked her pain, but inside her resolve was fraying. Each face around her looked thinner, wearier, more broken. She couldn't let them see her doubt. But at night, when they huddled in silence, she stared into the dark and wondered how long she could pretend. Then on the third day in the caves, they found it. A faint draft, cool air brushing against their faces, carrying with it the scent of open space. Hope surged through the group like a current. They stumbled forward, following the draft through narrow tunnels until a dim light appeared ahead, a slit of daylight bleeding through jagged stone. An exit. But as they neared it, Aisha froze. The light wasn't natural. It flickered, mechanical. She raised her rifle slowly, her breath catching. Because waiting on the other side of that slit wasn't freedom. It was something else entirely. Something that had been waiting for them. The light pulsed faintly through the crack in the rock, steady and deliberate, too clean to be sunlight. Aisha's heart sank as realization clawed at her chest. The survivors clustered behind her, whispering, their voices tinged with relief. They thought it was the end of their nightmare. She knew it was. Not yet. Stay back, she whispered, raising her hand. Her tone carried something new, a finality, a weight that silenced them without question. The glow grew stronger as she stepped closer, pressing her cheek against the cold stone, peering through the jagged slit. What she saw stole the air from her lungs. A cavern beyond, vast and machine-lit, humming with energy, and within it, racks of drones, dozens, maybe hundreds, lined in perfect rows like coffins waiting for their corpses. Their lights blinked in rhythmic pulses, cold blue eyes opening and closing as if dreaming. The exit wasn't freedom. It was a nest. Her body froze, torn between two instincts: warn the others or let them keep their hope a few seconds longer. But hope built on lies is a weapon, and lies get people killed. She turned, her voice low, even almost gentle. It's not the way out. Faces fell instantly. The glow in their eyes extinguished as quickly as it had sparked. Hamed swore under his breath. One of the younger soldiers, barely more than a boy, sank to his knees. No, he whispered. No, there has to be. His voice broke. Please. Bilal clenched his fists, anger flaring to mask despair. What is it then? What did you see? She met his gaze, steady, unblinking. Machines, more than we've ever faced. The silence that followed was unbearable. Major Iqbal coughed, each sound wet and ragged, the wound in his chest worsening with every mile they'd carried him. He was pale now, lips gray, his breath shallow. But even in that state, he tried to lift his voice. If they're here, he rasped, then this is their heart, their factory. You didn't trap us, Aisha. You led us right to the source. The word struck her like a blade. She wanted to deny it, to shake her head and insist she hadn't chosen this path. But she had. Every step deeper into the caves, every call she'd made, consciously or not, had brought them here. And maybe fate had been waiting. The soldiers argued quietly in the shadows. Hamed wanted to turn back, to retrace their steps and risk the rubble. Bilal argued that going back meant certain death, that their only chance was forward. Their voices clashed, echoing harshly against stone. Desperation made them cruel. Aisha remained silent, her back pressed to the wall, eyes fixed on the glow through the crack. The hum of the machines vibrated faintly against her skin, like a warning. Rahman touched her arm weakly. Don't carry this alone, he murmured. Her throat tightened. She wanted to tell him she already was. That leadership wasn't a mantle, it was a wound, and hers bled quietly, unseen. Eventually, Major Iqbal called them to order, though his voice was barely above a whisper. There is no going back, we're too deep. Supplies are gone, if we turn around we starve. He looked at Aisha then, his eyes fever bright. But if we move forward, maybe we destroy something that matters. Maybe we cut off their supply, their strength. Someone muttered, or maybe we all die. Iqbal smiled faintly, his lips cracked with blood. That's war. Then his gaze shifted again to Aisha. It was not a request, it was a passing of fire. You lead them now, he said. And then he sagged back against the wall, his breath rattling. The silence afterward was thicker than any cave wall. Aisha stood very still, feeling the eyes on her. No one challenged the commander's words. Not Bilal, not Hamed, not the broken boy on the ground. The weight pressed down on her chest until she could barely breathe. She remembered Khalid's laugh, soft and steady, the way he used to joke during the hardest drills. Leadership isn't about medals, it's about carrying the weight no one else will. She blinked hard, the cavern blurred. Then she lifted her rifle. We moved forward. The journey into the machine chamber felt like walking into the throat of some living beast. The air grew warmer, buzzing with power. The walls were no longer pure stone. They bore scars of excavation, smooth edges cut by tools not made for human hands. The hum grew louder, rattling through bones, until it became less a sound and more a presence. When they emerged into the chamber, the sight was overwhelming. Rows of drones, towering stacks of parts, cables snaking like veins into the walls. The floor shimmered faintly with heat, and in the distance, massive forges spat sparks into the air like stars. An underground factory, hidden, breathing, feeding the war above. No one spoke. Because every one of them understood, this wasn't just a nest. It was the heart of their enemy. Aisha's mind raced. They couldn't destroy all of it. Not with rifles, not with grenades. The scale was impossible. But maybe. Her eyes landed on a central column, a massive reactor pulsing with blue-white light. Its hum was louder than the rest, steady as a heartbeat. If it was the power source. She felt a strange calm settle over her, the kind that comes when choices narrow into a single path. She turned to the platoon. Their faces were pale, eyes wide, but they were watching her, waiting. Her voice was steady. That's where we strike. They moved with quiet precision, slipping between rows of dormant drones, their footsteps drowned beneath the constant hum. Every flicker of light made hearts race. Every hiss of steam sounded like betrayal. Aisha led from the front, her senses sharpened to every detail. The scent of oil and metal filled her nose. Heat prickled her skin. She could almost taste electricity in the air. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, from the knowledge of what was coming. Rahman leaned against her as they walked, his breath shallow. If we do this, he whispered, none of us make it out. She didn't answer, because he was right. When they reached the base of the reactor, they crouched low, taking cover behind massive coils of cable. The column towered above them, its glow casting shadows that made them look like ghosts. Bilal checked his gear, muttering, "We don't have enough charges to level this thing." Aisha's gaze hardened. "Then we use what we have to set off a chain reaction." Hamed shook his head in disbelief. "That's suicide." "Maybe," she said softly, then her voice firmed. "But it's also the only way to end this." The silence that followed was heavy. Then the boy who had cried earlier, the one who had begged for hope, nodded slowly. "If it means others don't go through what we did, it's worth it." The words were fragile, but they carried weight. And one by one, the others nodded too. They set to work, planting charges at the base of the reactor, threading wires, whispering prayers under their breaths. Hands moved fast, but each movement carried the solemnity of ritual. Aisha helped steady Rahman as he tried to fix a charge, his hands trembling too much from blood loss. She covered his fingers with hers, guiding him gently. "You don't have to," she whispered. He gave her a faint smile. "I do, because you carried me this far. Let me carry something too." Her throat closed. She pressed her forehead briefly against his before pulling away. When the last charge was set, they gathered in silence. There was no speech, no rallying cry, only the hum of the reactor and the weight of unspoken truths. Aisha looked at each face, the scars, the fear, the quiet dignity. She wanted to memorize them, to carry them with her into whatever came next. She thought of her mother, waiting by the window for letters. She thought of Khalid, his laughter echoing across years. She thought of all the voices lost in the dirt, the ones no one else would remember. And she knew this was her verse. Not written in metals, not carved into stone, but etched into the battlefield's eternal poem. As they prepared to trigger the charges, a sound broke the stillness. The drones. Their eyes flickered open, one row at a time, a wave of cold blue light spreading across the chamber. Heads turned, wings unfolded, a mechanical chorus rising as they woke. Aisha's breath caught. They were out of time. Why did the silence feel louder than the gunfire that had once haunted this valley? The battlefield lay quiet now. No more crack of rifles, no more thud of mortars. Only the low groan of wind moving through broken walls and the rustle of torn canvas left behind by soldiers who would never return to claim it. She stood there, boots sunk into the soft earth that had absorbed too much blood, eyes tracing the horizon as though searching for something she wasn't ready to name. Her rifle hung at her side, but it felt like an afterthought now. Not a weapon, not even a tool, just a piece of metal carrying weight she could no longer measure. The others had already left. Their convoy had moved down the dirt road, kicking up dust in the fading light. She told them she needed a moment, just a moment. They hadn't asked why. They didn't have to. Because everyone could see it in her eyes. This war hadn't left her. Not yet. The valley whispered with memories. The broken minaret. The house where the boy with the blue scarf had waved once before disappearing forever. The ridge where her finger had trembled on the trigger, hesitating at the exact second she was supposed to act. The hidden field hospital where a woman with tired hands had stitched her up in silence. No judgment in her eyes, no words, just quiet mercy. And then there were her own scars. Not the ones across her shoulder, or the thin pale line on her cheek, or the deep wound above her ribs. No, the ones she couldn't show. The ones that woke her in the night, left her breathless, left her staring at ceilings as if they were maps leading back to all the places she couldn't forget. She knelt, pressing her hand against the dirt. The ground was warm still, holding the last of the day's heat. She whispered something, not prayer, not confession, not even apology, something closer to memory, closer to song. And in that whisper her voice cracked. For months she had carried herself as if she were unbreakable, the sniper who never missed, the operative who never faltered, the woman who could carry silence like a shield. But here, alone in the valley, she allowed herself the one truth she had buried deeper than all the others. She was tired. Not weak, never weak, but tired in a way that sleep couldn't cure, tired in her bones, tired in her soul. Behind her, a footstep crunched against gravel. She turned slowly, hand brushing her rifle out of habit, but she didn't need to lift it. It was Ramirez. He hadn't left with the others after all. He stood a few feet away, helmet tucked under his arm, face drawn and worn but not unkind. "You weren't coming," he said simply. She gave a faint, almost bitter smile. "I was, eventually." He didn't push. He didn't question. He just stepped closer, close enough that the silence no longer felt like it was swallowing her whole. They stood there for a while, saying nothing, just letting the air carry the weight neither of them could. Finally, Ramirez said, "You ever think about what we'll tell people when it's over?" She stared at the horizon, that it was nothing like the stories. He nodded. "Yeah, that sounds about right." Her throat tightened, because she knew the truth. Most of it could never be told. The hesitation, the mistakes, the moments when humanity had bled through the discipline, when she'd seen her enemy not as a target but as a person and almost paid for it with her life. Those weren't the stories nations wanted, but they were the stories that lived. The sun began to dip, the sky turning gold, then bruised purple. Shadows stretched across the valley, long and jagged like scars carved into the earth itself. She thought about her father, the man who never spoke of his own service, who carried silence like it was stitched into his skin. She thought about her mother, who had kissed her goodbye without letting her tears fall until the door was closed. She thought about the people who would never know her name, but who might live because of what she had done here. And for the first time in a long time, she felt the faintest flicker of peace. Not joy, not relief, just the smallest ember of peace. Ramirez shifted, as if sensing something had changed. "We should head back, they'll wait for us." She looked at him, then back at the valley one last time. The wind picked up, lifting dust, carrying it high before letting it scatter into nothing, like memory itself, like verses written in smoke. Her scars ached as she stood, but the pain no longer felt like punishment. It felt like a reminder, a verse, a line in a poem older than all of them. She whispered almost too softly for even herself to hear, "These aren't wounds, they're words." Ramirez frowned slightly, as though he hadn't caught it, but she didn't repeat herself. Some things weren't meant to be explained. Together they walked back toward the waiting convoy. The engines were distant but steady, like a heartbeat pulling them home. And as she climbed into the vehicle, the last of the sunset burning against her face, she let herself breathe. For once, just breathe. Because sometimes survival wasn't about victory. Sometimes it was about carrying forward the verses etched into you, refusing to let them be erased, refusing to let them be forgotten. The convoy rolled forward, tires grinding over broken earth. She sat in silence, the hum of the engine surrounding her. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, not yet, just to hold the images inside her for one more moment. The boy with the blue scarf, the woman's hands, the valley's silence, Ramirez's presence, her scars. And in the hush of that moment, the truth settled in her chest. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The road stretched on. The valley fell behind. And the poem carried her forward, not finished, never finished, but alive in every step she had taken, and every step still left to take. And when the night came, quiet and endless, she let the silence surround her without fear. For the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt whole.